Welcome to Running Hot, Action Network's motorsports betting podcast. I'm your host, Nick Giffen, predictive analyst here at Action Network. And joining me, as always, my co-host, Stephen Young of RotoGrinders, better known as Stevie TPFL. And this week, we're talking bets for the USA Today 301 at New Hampshire Motor Speedway here on Running Hot. Last weekend at Iowa, Ryan Blaney won in relatively comfortable fashion after Kyle Larson was involved in some on-track incidents. Larson did have one of, if not the best cars throughout the race. Blaney winning ahead of Larson's teammates, William Byron and Chase Elliott, who finished second and third. But Stevie, of course, the talk from Iowa was how good of a race it was. That partial repave led to a little bit of tire concerns through practice, but they only minorly reared themselves as an issue in the race. But we had some fantastic racing at Iowa, didn't we?
I'm excited. From what I've heard is like a 3-year contract, and it's been the best short track race we've had with the next gen car. Not even like this season. It's been the best race that we've had with the next gen car. It was phenomenal. There was passing, there was tire fall off, there was, all kinds of different stuff. Ryan Blaney just had the car. Like Kyle Larson was really fast too before he had some issues. But man, they nailed the setup for Ryan Blaney. He was phenomenal. Was able to grab him at, I think, plus 425 live, which doesn't sound crazy, but like it helped ease the rest of my week because I was very high on Toyota early in the week, and Ford showed up. They were fast. Was really happy for Ryan Blaney. I feel like he's had a win coming multiple times this year, and he's had some bad luck. We've been on him when he's had some bad luck. So, but yeah, Iowa, don't repave the rest of that track. Let's just leave it how it is. Go back and let's race there again next year because it was so much fun to watch. Like, it was pre-next gen short track racing, and hopefully we can build off of that somehow. Like, we're bringing a new tire to New Hampshire, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, I'm excited that we're likely going to go back to Iowa next year.
Well, and here's the thing for me. Iowa did have some tire fall off, but it wasn't like mega, right? So it wasn't like your Richmond. So it was only just enough to where it mattered, but you could still do a 0 tire or a 2 tire strategy and kind of make it work depending on how far into the tires you were. So it brought out a lot of different strategies because there were a handful of yellows and stuff. So it was a really good race. Thought it was a great race. Definitely, like you said, the best short flat track race of the next gen era. But speaking of short flat track races, we're on to the next one here at New Hampshire, a 1 mile flat track. It's what we call a true oval shape. It's got 180-degree turns at each end with 2 straightaways. There is a little bit of variable banking at New Hampshire. So while it is pretty flatly banked, at least there is a little bit of variable banking. And Stevie, I know racing at New Hampshire maybe isn't the most exciting thing, but it's also, at least for me, and I look at Jeff Gluck's good race poll, it hasn't been the most boring racing either. There's only been one, quote, stinker in the Jeff Gluck good poll era for New Hampshire. Everything else has just kind of been like, yeah, it's an average NASCAR race. So I think, the variable banking makes it so that, and just how wide it is, makes it so that there can be multiple grooves of racing at New Hampshire.
Yeah, I like New Hampshire. I always have liked New Hampshire. It's typically a racetrack that has good racing throughout the field. It's still tough to pass the leader. I feel like that's going to be a thing until we kind of figure out something. I don't know what to expect out of the tire that they're bringing this weekend. So that's expected to heat up more, which if teams are pushing it, is heating up tires is going to be an issue this weekend. So we'll see if that becomes a factor or not. But I like New Hampshire. I think it always produces good racing throughout the field, and I think it's a fun racetrack. This is a racetrack that it's kind of unpredictable. If you look back at recent years here, we've seen winners anywhere from first to 22nd. So, anything can kind of happen when you have a little bit of strategy and a fast race car at a racetrack like this.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is pretty interesting. You bringing up the tires in there, they're expected to heat up a little more. If we look at the top of the odds board, we've got some short odds because New Hampshire is a predictable racetrack. A lot of the favorites tend to win outside from that Almirola 80-1 win in 2021, but he never should have been 80-1. But Christopher Bell at plus 450, plus 400 at some places. Martin Truex Jr. plus 450 to plus 550. Denny Hamlin around 6, Kyle Larson around 7. Like, we got some short odds this week. And if, we're here at New Hampshire with this tire that we haven't run at New Hampshire before, and if it is heating up a little more and we don't get a lot of practice and or qualifying in, potential for some rain this weekend, but also just a shorter practice session, we don't get the 50-minute practice session. Does it make it a little bit harder to bet these shorter odds guys, knowing there could be potentially some uncertainty with tires and what would happen if they overheat?
No. And you're going to see that by like some of the picks that I like this week. I mean, I'm with you as far as like favorites typically win at this racetrack because it takes a special kind of person to win at this racetrack. I mean, like, think about like how good Kevin Harvick was good here. Matt Kenseth was really good here back in the day. Martin Truex Jr., I know he only has one win here, but like he's fast every time we come here. So like I have no issues betting favorites. And it's like the guys that you're looking at towards the top that are like the favorites are like mostly veterans too. And those are the guys, if we have some like tire fall off, they're going to be able to manage the tires the best anyway. And they're already good at this racetrack. So no issues for me betting the favorites this week. Hate to give you a quick no there, but yeah, no issues.
I think it's interesting. I mean, we did see Christopher Bell as one of the ones that had tire issues in practice at Iowa. And, you talk about the veterans. He isn't the most veteran. He's still obviously amazing. His New Hampshire track record is second to none when you consider all the series that he has had success in. He's number one in my model, but he's not plus 450 short in my model. So, yeah, it's just one of those spots where I find it a little tough to bet these guys that are so short, and especially if there's a tire potential issue. But we'll talk about this in my turn one pick. I'm not going to go too much more into that. Just wanted your quick thoughts there. Let's also talk about how can we build our sample size for New Hampshire, given that it is a 1 mile shorter, flatter track. We've probably got some good comparable tracks here, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look even back to Iowa a little bit last weekend. That's, a little bit of recent sample size. Gateway, I think, is okay. Richmond, Phoenix. It's those short flats that we basically like to kind of all throw in the same thing. But I honestly, like, my model really factors in New Hampshire past data. I feel like this is a racetrack where if you're good at New Hampshire, you're likely going to be good at New Hampshire because it is a short flat, but like you said, it has a little bit of banking. Drivers that are good here are typically good here. And I mean, drivers that struggle here continue to struggle. And like lack of practice isn't going to help guys that continue to struggle.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with you. Track history is super important here at New Hampshire. I do think you can even pull in a little bit of Martinsville, just similar shape, similar flatness, even though it's only half the size and a little tighter on those 180 turns in terms of radius than New Hampshire. But I think you could pull in a little bit. So basically for me, it's track history. And then how are you doing at all these shorter, flatter tracks from gateway size to shorter, and flatter. Like I'm not pulling Bristol, for example. I'm not counting that. That's a steep track, concrete, totally different beast there. So yeah, that's the comparable tracks. Any other intangibles to handicap here at New Hampshire?
Yeah, I keep looking at recent speed. We're seeing a lot of progression from Ford from the beginning of the season to now. Chevy's kind of, I don't want to say they're plateauing, but like we really haven't seen outside of Kyle Larson really fast Chevys. So I mean, just continue to evolve with the season. The season is like Ford is really kind of catching up. Toyota still has a lot of speed in a lot of their cars. Where is William Byron? Where is Alex Bowman? Chase Elliott had a good week, but like he still doesn't have like dominating speed. So I mean, my biggest thing right now is like, is Chevy okay? We know they're developing a car, new body for next season. Like the two new bodies that we're seeing from Ford and Toyota, it really starts to be. It seems like it's starting to play more and more of a factor right now. So that's all for me. Like, where is Chevy? That should be. It's like
funny you say that coming off a week where, Chevy finishes second and third without them being Larson. But it is true they don't have they weren't as fast as Blaney or Larson. I'm referring to Elliott and Byron. They weren't as fast as Blaney or Larson. We did see a little bit of a comeback from Daniel Suarez, which I think has been good over the past 3-4 weeks. Races he's had more speed, but they admittedly were testing after he got his win in Atlanta, and I think they got a little too far out of it, and they said they kind of needed to stop testing with him. So you're right. Maybe Chevy's plateauing, but they're still posting results. Chase Elliott still is posting top 5 after top 5. So,
and him and Byron both were like top 5 in like green flag speed. Not saying, all I'm saying is we outside of Kyle Larson, we haven't seen like a dominating Chevy car. Like they can run top 5, they can post results. I agree 100% with you as far as that. I'm talking more of like, where are they at? I mean, like, hey, shout out to Ricky Stenhouse Jr. last week. Like he finished 5th, and it was some strategy, but like once they got him track position, he didn't lose it. So like shout out to Stenhouse last week. So, but yeah, I agree with you as far as like they have speed. I'm talking like Blaney dominating speed, some Toyota dominating speed, like Ford dominating speed in general. Like outside of Larson, we just haven't like had that dominating Byron Elliott race in a while. It feels like
a long time. Yeah. Maybe since Byron at Martinsville, where he led the most laps, which was 2.5, 3 months ago, somewhere in that neighborhood. So you're right. Yeah, outside of Larson, there hasn't been the dominant speed from a Chevy, but that will do it for our preview of New Hampshire. Now we got to dive into the bets. As always, we're going to take you for a lap around New Hampshire. 4 turns, 1 pick from Stevie, 1 from me per turn before we drive into victory lane. So Stevie, green flag for the USA today, 3:01. Let's dive into turn 1. All right, what do you got here in turn 1, Stevie? It's not a Chevy.
It's not. I'm going to the foreign market. I'm going to BetMGM. Josh Berry, top 10, plus 120 over there on BetMGM. I'm a fan. I was very skeptical of Josh Berry getting a cup ride, but I don't know if I should be anymore. Like he's putting out good performances. Rodney Childress and this Ford team, they're phenomenal. I mean, and he's really helping Josh Berry. And if we look at Richmond, Gateway, Iowa, he was top 10 in speed in all of those races. He struggled at Phoenix, but that was early in his, time with the 4 car. We're seeing progressive when it comes to Josh Berry, and we're getting it at plus money. He's been really solid. Stuart Haas has been really solid in qualifying. They have a good, solid qualifying. And Kevin Harvick was really good at New Hampshire. Josh Berry's good at these shorter tracks, shorter flat tracks. I feel like they're going to start in a good spot with Kevin Harvick notes, Rodney Childress on the box, and you're going to give Josh Berry a chance to run top 10. So that's where I'm going to start this week, with a Berry top 10 at plus 120.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The way that team is performing over recent weeks in terms of the shorter, flatter tracks, Iowa, Gateway, like you mentioned, they're doing absolutely phenomenal. They've got speed. They've been on some good strategies as well in some of these races. Obviously, bad result at Gateway because of a wreck there, but they had speed. So just a lot of good, momentum from this team, good recent form as well, which is another thing that I think that you mentioned in the intangibles matters a lot. Recent speed, and they've definitely shown more recent speed. For my turn 1 pick, I don't have a specific pick, but my model is showing some leans, some thin value on 2 drivers that I think are very similar. One of them certainly more advanced into his career than the other, but that's Kyle Larson and Tyler Reddick. Both of these guys, I've always likened Reddick to a younger Kyle Larson. They've kind of had a similar progression, similar tracks they've been good at, and similar tracks they've struggled at, like Martinsville earlier in their careers. And they both started with smaller teams and have kind of, Larson with Ganassi and Reddick with Richard Childress Racing, which was certainly mid-tier then, into more upper tier teams. 2311 has kind of got that Joe Gibbs alliance, and of course Larson with Hendrick. So I've got thin value on both of them. I don't have any specific bets I like, just because, the Toyotas are going to be so strong with Hamlin, Truex, and Bell, of course. But I really like these 2 guys, so I'm going to be keeping an eye on them. And both of them have popped at New Hampshire before. Kyle Larson, throughout his whole career, has had pop races at New Hampshire, 3 top 3 finishes. Even in his first race at New Hampshire in the Cup Series, he finished 2nd. So just last year, finished 3rd at New Hampshire. Tyler Reddick, also very good at New Hampshire. In his 2nd race at New Hampshire, which was with Richard Childress Racing, he finished 13th, but it wasn't as flattering. He ran inside the top 10 all race, 99% of laps inside the top 15. And he does have 2 other top 10 finishes at New Hampshire, one being his rookie year where he finished 10th with Richard Childress Racing, and then last year finishing 6th with 2311 Racing. So no specific plays, but Stevie, I think I like these 2 guys. I'm technically showing some model value on both of them.
Yeah, I mean, Kyle Larson anywhere at this point.
Yeah.
He's just good everywhere. Like, the guy, I mean, I think he's one of the best race car drivers in the world, not just in NASCAR, in the world. Anything he gets in, he's fast. I like the Tyler Reddick call. Really, really, ranking Toyota high this week. And it just seems like everyone's going to be looking at JGR again. So don't be afraid to look at some Tyler Reddick stuff. Yeah, I mean, probably wait for practice and qualifying to touch anything with like Toyota in general. Like, I don't have a lot of Toyota outside of my next pick here this week.
And actually, I did have a note in here to talk about practice and qualifying because, there is the potential for some rain this weekend. And if qualifying gets rained out, we're going to have Christopher Bell starting inside the top front 2 rows here. And even if we do have qualifying, he's probably going to qualify well anyway. And so what's going to happen if we get a Truex or a Bell or a Hamlin or a Larson starting, or multiple of them especially starting so far forward? What's going to happen is their odds are going to get even shorter. And then that's going to open up. And yes, New Hampshire is a predictable track, but the back half of the top 10, all that stuff is still needs to be filled out. And what I notice books do is just because those guys get shorter, what happens is their top 10 odds also get shorter, and basically everything is scaled to their win probability when that really shouldn't be the case. So it opens up even more top 10 value. So you could see somebody like a Todd Gillen right now, who's 10-1 after practice and qualifying might be 12-1, even though he's been totally fine in practice and qualifying if these heavy favorites start toward the front. So I think this is a good week. Even though track position matters, you mentioned we've seen winners from New Hampshire come from 21st. So you can pass at New Hampshire. It's hard to pass for the lead, but you can pass definitely throughout the field. So I think it's a good spot also to wait a little bit, which is why I'm waiting with Kyle Larson and Tyler Reddick. So turn 1 down, Stevie has Josh Berry top 10. I'm showing some value on Reddick and Larson, but probably waiting until after practice and qualifying to fire on them or any other driver that I'm not giving out here on the show. So let's dive into turn 2. All right, turn 2, Stevie, you are going, and this is why I asked you about at the top of the show. You are going with one of these favorites.
I am. I'm going to go to Martin Truex Jr. at plus 550 here. I hate betting these lines or these odds. We're not, me and you talk about this all the time. We're not the biggest proponent of like taking really short odd outrights, but you look at all the data, and I can't believe he's only had 1 win here. Led 254 laps last year, started second. You worry a little bit about where he would potentially start if it does get rained out. I think he's like in the 8th range, 9th range, in that range somewhere. So you worry a little bit about that, but man, Martin Truex Jr. just announced his retirement last week. Doesn't this just seem like the poetic story? Announces retirement, comes to New Hampshire, which is like one of his home tracks, and gets the win. Like, they were so fast here last year. Like, they are going to have a good starting spot as far as like where to set this race car up. Like, he was fast in every part of the race last year, and he was really just untouchable. This has been a good racetrack for him throughout the years. This is a good track with him with the next-gen car. If we look back at the 2 races with New Hampshire with the next-gen car, he's been the fastest in both of those races. So, yeah, I think Martin Truex Jr. at 550 is very much in play. You brought up a really good point, and before we move on to like your pick really quick, I did want to point out that like Chase Elliott is good at New Hampshire. He would potentially start on the outside pole if we do get rain. Mm-hmm. If I'm looking Friday night and I like assume that there's going to be rain on Saturday and we get a wash, I might throw an outright on Chase Elliott. I just want to throw that out there because I think you made a fantastic point with like your leans and stuff where, I mean, Larson would start like 15th, 18th, somewhere in that range. So like his odds would really move in our direction, but like Chase Elliott's odds would move the opposite way. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, I like that. I will be talking about Chase Elliott in a little bit, but One little point here to add to Martin Truex Jr. You mentioned he only has one win, but ever since he was with Furniture Row and when they switched from Chevy to Toyota, he has raced 10 times in New Hampshire. He's led triple-digit laps 6 of the 10 times, 60% of the time. And one of those other races, he led 83 laps, nearly a third of the race, more than a quarter of the race. So the dude is just absolutely dominant here. It's interesting because 19, 20, and 21 was right at the end of the Gen 6 era, and that's where he led 0 laps. But that was where they were trying to figure out, do we go high downforce and low horsepower, low down? So those 3 years, it just kept changing with what would happen at these shorter, flatter tracks. 2019 was a total stinker just in terms of the package at shorter, flat tracks. 2021 was much better, closer to what we have now. He didn't lead any laps, but he still had a third-place finish in one of those 2 races. So Truex is always good when we come here to New Hampshire. So my turn to pick, I am sticking with the Toyotas here, and I'm going to take Bubba Wallace for a top 10 finish. You can get that at plus 70. My Action Network colleague, PJ Walsh, wrote this up earlier in the week when Bubba Wallace was plus 220. I hadn't run my model at the time. I was doing a lot of stuff for the European Championships, which I had maybe one of the worst beats of all time this morning. But that aside, Bubba Wallace plus 170, still value in my model. Second best average finish at New Hampshire in the next gen era. Top 5 average driver rating, average running position, things like that at New Hampshire in the next gen era. I don't need to repeat all of PJ Walsh's points. Go check his article out over at actionnetwork.com because I'm with him. Bubba Wallace plus 170 top 10 finish.
Yeah, I've wrote this up this week as well. I'm on this one. I've already bet this one, and I feel like it's like we say it every single time we go to these racetracks where books are just undervaluing Bubba Wallace on short flats. He's really good at this racetrack type, and let's just keep taking advantage of it. It doesn't always work out, but I'm going to keep taking advantage of it until they fix where they're at with their lines.
Yeah, exactly. So Bubba Wallace plus 170, Truex to win plus 550 for Stevie. A couple of Toyotas in turn 2. So New Hampshire, that nice stretch, nice straight back stretch as we head towards turn 3. But before we get there, I got to remind you all, Running Hot is presented by BetMGM. Use bonus code ACTION when signing up to get up to $1,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. For new users in Arizona, Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Jersey, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Okay, 2 turns down, 2 turns to go. We're going to drive into turn 3. Turn 3, Stevie, you're going with another winner. This time, though, not a Toyota.
Yeah, back-to-back. Hitting home runs. That's what I'm trying to do here. But I got my boy Joey Logano. I can't remember the last time I bet Joey Logano outright to win a race, but he's plus 850. This is a model bet, Nick. My model absolutely loves Joey Logano this week. And, I mean, I looked into the data, and I understand why, but I mean, it loves him way more than I do, and sometimes when I have these like outliers on my thoughts to my model, I just say, I'm just going to throw a unit out there and let it ride. I was looking at something that I found really interesting when it came to the data on Logano. The start of last year's race, he was okay. The end of last year's race, he was phenomenal. He had a ton of speed. He ended up finishing second in that race. Had Martin Truex Jr. not had that car that he had last year, maybe Logano wins this race last year. This guy needs a win. This is a racetrack where he can easily get a win. So I'm just going to trust the model on this one. He's won at New Hampshire before. We talk about, like, if you're good at New Hampshire, you're good at New Hampshire. Ford has been phenomenal. We've seen the speed from Ryan Blaney here recently. I like Joey Logano this week at plus 850 to win this race.
So Joey Logano, you mentioned the speed he had at the kind of flatter portion of the race last year. This is a thing for him at New Hampshire. If we go back to 2021, the year Eric Almirola won, that was the race where they threw the green flag and then rain came out and a few drivers crashed right off the start, like Martin Truex Jr. being one of them.
And Kyle Busch.
Kyle Busch. Denny Hamlin was in that.
Yeah.
Joey Logano also had issues in that race and went 2 laps down. came back on speed from 2 laps down and finished 4th, was probably the fastest car at the end of that race. Even though Bell was kind of catching Almirola and the darkness was coming and they shortened it, Almirola started pulling away from Bell a little bit there at the end, like the last 2 laps, but Logano was coming and he had one of the fastest cars. If we go to my track quality metric for this race, for New Hampshire, I should say, for this track, which again is how good above a driver's average track is he at this specific track. Number 1, Brad Keselowski over the last 4 New Hampshire races that have not been non-incident races. Number 2, Martin Truex Jr. Number 3, Christopher Bell. I don't think there's any surprise there. Number 4, Joey Logano. So definitely a great track here for Joey Logano. I'm going to try to find a way to get him on my betting card. You know, it's another one of those, like if practice or qualifying rains out or doesn't rain out, we could see movement in various directions with some of these drivers, and that might be our opportunity to hop on some of these guys. Because I do think, while, you know, I also have model value on Logano, I don't trust it. B, it's very thin just because of how Logano has run this year. So I would like to have it drift back maybe towards that 12 range where he was early in the week and then probably pounce on him then. But, you know, I'm with you. I show model value on it. It's hard to bet it, but maybe we should just do it. So turn 3, Joe Logano plus 850 for Stevie. For me, I mentioned him, Chase Elliott. I'm going to take, and while I do like, maybe I should sprinkle his win bet, and I do have value on his win bet. I actually have pretty good value on his win bet. I'm just going to roll with top 5 plus 250. It feels a little safer when you've got the Truex's, Bells, and Hamlins, and Larsons, and Loganos in the field. So Chase Elliott, top 5 plus 250. I mean, he's just cranking off top 5 finishes left and right here. You know, you look at the last 11 races for Chase Elliott, and he has 7 top 5 finishes. New Hampshire, pretty good track for him as well. He ranks 10th in my track quality metric at New Hampshire. So he's had some good runs here. Just ran 3rd at Iowa this past weekend, which again, probably one of the more similar tracks that we can use for New Hampshire, and also definitely the recency part of it. So Chase Elliott plus 250 top 5 finish I'm going to roll with right now, especially because if it does rain out qualifying, this will get shorter.
Yeah, I saw that you had put this one on our sheet that we use when we're prepping for the show, and I had tailed this one, so I'm with you on this one. I will, like I mentioned, potentially look at his outright if we do project rain for Saturday and we don't get practice in qualifying, because I think they're going to unload good. He's going to unload with a good track position. Yeah, I mean, Chase Elliott not dominating speed recently. So, I mean, this is a guy that can easily run inside the top 5, and this is a good racetrack type for him. 2nd and 12th, and I throw a lot of last year out when it comes to Chase Elliott. So,
Exactly.
Good racetrack.
Yeah, definitely throw a lot of last year out with Chase Elliott. And to your earlier point where Chevy hasn't really had that race winning speed, that's also part of a reason maybe to just roll with his top 5 here instead of his outright. But like you said, if the rain forecast looks like qualifying may get rained out, might want to sprinkle that outright at 14-1. So we have one more turn, and of course, let's turn 4. Our final turn, Stevie. We're on the same driver here. You're taking one angle, I'm taking another. What do you got?
Yeah, I'm just going to go to a head-to-head bet here. I got Daniel Suarez over Todd Gillen at minus 130. I don't typically like paying this much juice when it comes to a head-to-head. I like Todd Gillen on this type of racetrack. When it comes to short flats, this is a good racetrack for him. Daniel Suarez is very underrated on this type of racetrack, and I feel like it's just being a little undervalued here. My model is showing this closer to like minus 150, so I don't mind paying the juice here at minus 130. I think Suarez has an excellent chance to run inside the top 10. Had some issues towards the end of last year's race, and still ended up finishing, I think, like 16th. Gillen's crew chief has been on point when it comes to strategy. He's been giving him good track position. I just think at the end of the day, Suarez is going to unload with more speed, potential practice and qualifying issues. And if we look at just average finish at New Hampshire, Suarez dominates Todd Gillen. So I'm going to pay the juice on this one and take Daniel Suarez over Gillen at minus 130.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I like this. And I agree. Gillen has been pulling off some finishes that have been amazing, but probably a little bit better than he's been running overall. A lot of great strategy. And if that doesn't work out, Suarez should be the faster car here. Newly American citizenized Daniel Suarez,
yeah.
by the way. So congratulations to Daniel Suarez. I'm going to take Suarez for a top 10 finish at 5-1 for my turn 4 pick. And, I mentioned how that team, they were kind of testing. They were kind of struggling mid-year. Well, if we look at the last 4 races, after Suarez and his, had been interviewed and kind of talked about that, Suarez has had an average running position of 13.2 or better in 3 of the last 4 races. Had some bad luck at Charlotte. Obviously, that got rain shortened to 600 there, but he was running inside the top 10 for most of that race. Sonoma ran, of course, really well. Again, just didn't quite get the finish that he probably deserved. And Iowa finished 9th. So 3 of the last 4 races with, especially the most recent 2, one being a road course and one being a flat track, that's a good sign for this team. They're running much better. So I feel much more comfortable taking Daniel Suarez for a top 10 finish at this point. And you mentioned it. He's pretty good at New Hampshire. Had a good run last year until really late. Finished 9th in 2022. If we go back even like his Joe Gibbs days, 6th place finish in his rookie year, 8th place finish in his rookie year with Joe Gibbs Racing. So, if he can replicate some of that form, now I know it is with Trackhouse, they're not Joe Gibbs Racing, but a top 10 finish is certainly not without the question. We're right on the borderline there, I think, for him in terms of being a top 10 car. And if you're getting a driver that's 12th, 15th place car at 5-1, that is fantastic value. So turn 4, the Daniel Suarez turn, but only one thing left to do. Of course, complete the lap around New Hampshire and drive into victory lane. So Stevie, we're both on this driver. We have not talked about him yet. I did have a top 10 bet on him, but that line moved before we got to record the podcast. So instead, we're switching to a top 5 bet. Who we got?
We're going to Brad Keselowski. I mean, again, we're going to be looking at some recent speed, and he has it. I know Iowa was a rough mess for him, and that threw me for a loop a little bit because he was able to do the test here. He said that it was just so much different than when they did the test, and they came with a lot of that test set up, and they just never really hit on it. New Hampshire's a really good track for Brad. This is a guy that consistently runs inside the top 5, top 10 at this racetrack. So, I mean, he won this race. What was it, 2020? He won here. So, and I think he won here in like 2014, if I remember correctly. I think it was 2014. But yeah, so like it's a good racetrack for him. I mean, for years, Joey Logano and Brad Keselowski were just really good at all short flats. And with the speed that RFK has had recently, I'm in on this one. I know you like the top 10. I like the top 10 as well. The line moved. I like the top 5. I don't think Brad Keselowski goes out and wins this race, so it's more of a top 5 bet for me than a race win. But I do think like he'll have top 10 speed. I think he'll be in a good position to potentially finish inside the top 5. And I mean, my model's showing value at plus 250 here for Keselowski.
Yeah, same. In my top 10 was at minus 140. When I woke up this morning, it was minus 165. So didn't like that as much, but I mentioned it. Brad Keselowski, number 1 in my track quality metric. If we take each driver's last 4 incident-free New Hampshire races and compare them to how they did at other tracks in the same equipment in the same year. So Brad Keselowski, absolutely fantastic at New Hampshire. If we look since, New Hampshire, of 2022. So if we go back on short flat tracks since this race in 2022, 9 of his 14 short flat incident free races were top 10 finishes. So 9 out of 14 is like 63%. New Hampshire is a super low incident rate. So considering New Hampshire is one of his better tracks, we would expect if he raced 14 times here, he'd finish inside the top 10, even more than 9 of those 14. And that will translate to the top 5 odds as well. So the top 5 didn't move overnight, but the top 10 did. So I'll kind of ladder this, if you will, a little bit into a top 5 at plus 250. But that is going to do it for us. Thank you for listening to the USA Today 301 episode of Running Hot, Action Network's Motorsports Betting Podcast. We'll be back next week as we talk bets for the Ally 400 at Nashville. On behalf of my co-host, Stephen Young, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you back here next week on Running Hot from Action Network.